Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your boy, Jeff Charles. And I've got another fire conversation for you today, and it's going to be great stuff. It's going to talk about something that I don't normally talk about. We're going to be talking about the hip hop scene, the music, the culture, the death, and, more about that. But before I bring on my guests, I'm going to remind you to like this video, share this video, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you'll be updated whenever I upload a new interview, which I do every Wednesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard. Also, I want to give a little bit of an announcement. If you are in the Texas area, or if you're going to be in the San Antonio area around March 11th, on that date, I'm going to be speaking at a protest. There is an eminent domain issue that is the prime example of government tyranny. Long story short, the San Antonio City Council, at the behest of the Texas state government, has initiated eminent domain proceedings against a bar that sits right next to the Alamo because they want to expand that operation. So they're trying to force him out of his business. Basically, he already said he's willing to sell, but they didn't want to pay the price that he set. So they're trying to use the threat of the government coming to take his stuff. So I'll be there in San Antonio. We're going to be doing a protest, some members of the Libertarian Party, but it's going to be people from all walks of life and political stripes. So definitely encourage you to show up. But without further ado, I want to dive into hip hop. And I want to bring on my good friend, writer for Timcast and political commentator and a member of Project 21, Mr. Adrian Norman. Welcome to the program, brother.
Hey, what's going on, Jeff? Thanks for having me on today, man.
Good, glad to have you. And this time I'm on the other side of the interview table. Now, I wanted to talk about this documentary that you made, and not just because I'm in it, even though I am, but because I thought the fact that you even created this was very interesting, and I've shared it with people that were really their minds were blown by it. So before we get into that, though, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a writer and political commentator. I work full-time for Timcast right now. It's a site run by Tim Pool. I'm sure your listeners have probably heard of him. Most people in the political space have.
Mm-hmm.
I've also written in the past for Epic Times, Newsweek, Federalist, Daily Caller. So it's kind of a little bit of my professional pedigree, I guess we could say. And as far as this project, it's the death of Takeoff really piqued my interest because, as you hear some of the commentators in the video say, each time that there's a rapper-involved homicide, there's an outpouring of support, and we start to ask questions about what's happening in these communities, what's happening with this violence, what's happening with the music, is the music a contributing factor to the violence? All these things come up. And then after a couple months, it sort of dies down and we go back to our lives and just sort of forget about all of it and never really continue the conversation. In the political space, you could say that some of us had that conversation when it comes to other issues, more so concerning the violence in cities like Chicago, St. Louis. Now we're starting to see that violence in New Orleans, which has displaced St. Louis as the world's murder capital. And we have these conversations, and it often is used as a talking point to score points on the other side rather than actually try to find solutions. So I wanted to take this opportunity when people are focused on what happened with Takeoff and shine a spotlight on it and kind of refocus the conversation to keep this conversation moving forward and really start to dig into what's happening in these communities. Why are some of these communities producing these sort of outcomes where violence seems to be the normal? We're not even surprised by it anymore. How did this get so normalized and just become ingrained in a part of everybody's life? How do we get here? And then more importantly, what do we do to solve it? And there's so many conversations to be had. One thing you'll notice, if you make it to the end of the special, instead of putting the end, I put the beginning, because it's meant to be the beginning of the conversation and to start this conversation in a lot of spaces. And I think that's what we're doing here today. And I'm happy to kind of dissect this with you.
Yeah, see, and that's one of the reasons why I was glad that you made this documentary. Because you and I have talked about this, and in the conservative space or the libertarian space, we've often complained because a lot of influencers on the right, they talk about this stuff, but it's like you said, it's only a talking point. They're not actually trying to solve a problem here. They're not really trying to call attention to anything. I mean, you have a lot of publications that will give you the death rate in Chicago every weekend, and that's about it. So basically, it comes off disingenuous, right? Whether they mean it that way or not, it comes off as disingenuous. And what I liked about the fact that you created this documentary is because you're actually trying to do something about this. Like, you're not just using it as a talking point. You're not just bringing it up to get clicks or whatever. You actually had a really good conversation with a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life. And I love the way it was put together, because you did get a lot of different perspectives, and it wasn't just, oh yeah, hip hop, is killing Black people, and if people just listen to Johnny Mathis, then none of this would be happening. You got everything from the fact that it can do harm, and to the idea that there are positive aspects of it. Is that kind of what you were going for, or were you kind of just wanting to get people together to have a conversation?
I really just wanted to get people together to have the conversation. As you'll notice, I mean, if you recall from our interview, I mean, we spoke for almost an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I just spoke to you last November.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have more people on, but just from a time management and editing standpoint, it wasn't really possible. I do all the stuff myself. I don't farm this out to an editing team. So it was a lot of work for me. 7 was a lot to manage because I had
I
seven
bet.
hours of 7 hours of footage to get through from people who can talk. So I
Mm-hmm.
mean, all y'all filled every minute of that entire space. So that, I mean, one of the toughest parts was figuring out what to cut, because I mean, all of you said so much. You gave me so much content that was all fire, and it was all facts, and it was all truth. Um, the people who were featured on it, yourself, Zuby, Rachel Ferguson, she's a professor at University in Chicago, Sonnie
Mm-hmm.
Johnson,
I love her. I love Rachel and Sonny. Yeah.
Megan Glover, and Delano Squires. You guys, I think, would disagree on a lot of things, and I think you also agree on a lot of things, just in general, and not necessarily maybe points or issues or solutions, but maybe how to get there, and the approach might differ a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You say, how do I get from Los Angeles to New York? Well, I mean, I could take a bus, I could take a car, I could take an
Mm-hmm.
airplane. We have different ways that we may want to get to the same destination, and that's okay. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't I didn't plan on having a diverse set of perspectives in that regard for each of you. I mean, I wanted everybody to be involved, to have a sort of a high degree of intellectual capacity, and that was something at the forefront of the decision making. But again, it's just I would love to have gotten 10 more people on. It's just that I wasn't able to do it. And we got into, there were some overlapping themes, let's just say, with the project. We kind of focused on the key areas that everybody sort of talked about, were the fatherless homes, and the nuclear family structure, and the importance that may play in this issue. We talked about Black culture and hip hop music as a reflection of Black culture, and if that's something that's contributing. We got into spirituality and people's faith and walk with God. We got into mentorship and people, and then destabilized communities needing somebody to show them how to get out, not just talk to them from a keyboard 2,000 miles away.
Right.
We got into how these neighborhoods became destabilized in the first place, talking about the history of progressive policies and the role of government. So we covered a lot of ground, and I was happy with the end product. Just because we talked about so many diverse things that I very rarely, if ever, hear a part of a single conversation.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of feedback have you been getting so far?
Actually, I haven't gotten a ton of feedback, but the feedback I have got has been overwhelmingly supportive. Yeah, it's been good, and it's again, I think it's a collection of diverse perspectives. And a lot of times when we digest content now, we turn to our favorite network, our favorite influencer, or our favorite podcast. And I mean, we can kind of know by who the host is and what the guest is, like what's going to be said.
Right.
We get in these
Right.
spaces, man. It's the same circuit of cats doing the same stuff, saying the exact same things over and over and over again. And I think with this, we had a conversation that you don't normally hear, because you're not just getting the a set of talking points or just one perspective. You're getting multiple perspectives, again, all in one package. And I think it gave a more comprehensive look at this particular issue, which can be used to give us a better starting ground on where we go to address these things. We can't run from this. We can't hide from any of it. So, nobody tried to suppress the fact that the family structure does play a role in these communities.
Sure.
Nobody's trying to downplay the fact that the role the state played in creating the conditions for violence and destabilizing the neighborhoods with eminent domain and some of the government sanctioned policies. Redlining comes up a lot, just in general. But nobody's sugarcoating those things, and it allows us to, I think, to be able to be in a position to where, if we're all honest about all of it, we can start to move the needle and have the conversations that need to propel us forward to finding solutions and motivating people to take the actions that are actually going to change the outcomes for the people who are impacted by this insane level of violence.
And that's another thing that I liked about this documentary, Adrian. I really think you were onto something here, because this issue gets so politicized with Team Red and Team Blue just going on their talking points. And they're both not necessarily lying. They're telling the truth, but they're not telling the whole truth. So if you go on the left, they say these conditions are because of racism, systemic racism. And that's pretty much it. That's all that's causing this stuff. Not a whole lot else. I mean, and I'm talking about the far left. I mean, because there's people within the middle who are more nuanced, but that's all they want to highlight. They want to highlight the systemic racism. That plays a part, definitely. But then on the right, you've got people ignoring the systemic racism part of it, and they're talking about fatherless homes. That's what's contributing to it. That's also true. That's true as well. But there's more to it than that. I mean, there's all kinds of factors that play into it. I mean, if you grew up in a fatherless home, but you were born and raised in Beverly Hills, chances are you're not selling drugs, right? I mean, let's just be real. But when you have all these things at the same time, you've got a lack of education, you've got poverty, you've got a culture of crime. All those things create a cocktail that leads to this stuff. And since neither side wants to acknowledge all of it, then the problem can't really get solved. And that's what I liked about your documentary, because all of those things were brought up. Fatherless homes, that's an issue. The government, I mean, you know me, like that's a huge issue for me. I know how much the government has contributed to this stuff, education, all of these things. And it provided a more holistic viewpoint on the matter. And honestly, I've never seen a production or a conversation or anything that did this in the way that you did. Why do you think that is? Why I mean, they could be out there. I've just never seen it, and I've looked for it. But these conversations are so politicized; they only focus on one or two things. Why do you think that is?
Thanks for the compliment. I appreciate that. I honestly couldn't tell you, bro. Like for me, I'm a creative person. In the political space, I don't really get to do a lot of that, but I'm a musician, I'm an artist, and I wanted to bring just a higher level of, I think, production and sort of artistry to this project as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of what guided me. So I really can't speak to that. I didn't notice. I didn't do a lot of digging into other projects on similar topics. I've seen a few interviews where people sort of cover this issue. Again, it seems pretty formulaic and straightforward as far as the conversations and what I have seen from other projects. But I do like the diversity of this project and all of the
Mm-hmm.
things that we were able to cover.
So when you were putting this thing together, was there anything that stuck out to you that was surprising? Like what if anything surprised you about the process of making this documentary?
How much work went into it? It's a lot of work, bro. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of work. And even watching, even playing it back when I would, export, what I thought would be a final version, I kind of start to take it for granted, just seeing as it got closer and closer to the finish line. I think that's probably with any project. I've done the same thing with music, but that's probably what surprised me the most. Exactly how much work it took to even put this together.
Mhm.
As far as the ideas, it's things that we talk about quite a bit online. It's conversations that we typically have, and I hope that it inspires people to want to sort of move out of our tribes and our camps
Mhm.
and our because especially within the Black conservative space. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. We're very balkanized. We got like two different factions of like Black conservatives,
Mhm.
and cats don't want to talk to each other, and we got issues dating back years this and that. I want to get over that, man. It's time to like solve problems. And if we're really concerned about what's happening, not even just in black communities, but with America,
Mhm.
it's important that we get out of these spaces to where we antagonize each other and um, you know, we, I think we just have to move toward being able to unify and work with one another toward actually manifesting change. Because there's people out there doing the work. We got blueprints on how to start fixing this stuff. Maj Toure does great work, informing people on their Second Amendment rights and being out in the streets and preaching liberty and letting people know there's more than just two options as far as political parties. You got King Randall, who is a huge proponent of excuse me, of getting involved in what he's doing with the School for Extra Boys, and being able to impact the community by literally being a living example of how men are supposed to behave and giving them the skills that they need, teaching them how to change their oil, teaching them how to change tires, that how to dress properly and present yourself in a way that commands respect. There are people out there who are walking the walk. We just need more of us.
So, and I do agree. I mean, because I remember when the Black conservative Civil War happened, and as bad as it sounds, I think it was necessary. I think that differentiation needed to be made so that other voices could get out there. That being said, I mean, I don't see much of a use for it now, and I don't really even see it going on as much. I mean, you might see some conversations here and there, but I think the lines have been established. I mean, there are different types of Black conservative thought, and that's really all I wanted. I didn't want to cancel anybody. I just wanted to add more voices on, and I think that happened. I think we did that. But I think you're right. Now we do need to start looking for solutions among people who actually want to do them. Because I mean, there's people, and this isn't just a Black conservative thing, but there are influencers who are just in it for clout, clicks, and cash, the 3 C's. But then there are people who actually want to do the work. But what about let me run this by you. What about Black people in general? I mean, like Black conservatives, libertarians coming together, even with Black people on the left. I'm asking that because a few months ago, Teslin Figaro, who you're probably familiar with, invited me onto a Twitter space that was a panel, and it had Black people from all different political stripes. I mean, you had far leftist Nina Turner was on there, and then Amash was on there, I was on there. I mean, it ran the gamut, and I really commended her for putting that together. But do you think things like that could also help to solve this issue that we're seeing in our inner cities?
Absolutely. More conversation is always a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to be the guy that says to shut down voices. I mean, we've seen what's happened with the censorship culture and how that's wreaked havoc on our biomedical establishment over the last 3 years. So even if somebody has bad ideas, the best way to counter that is with more ideas, not less.
Right.
So yeah, I think having a conversation that involves multiple stakeholders from different ideological perspectives and backgrounds is always going to be a good thing. It's going to allow us to be able to identify problems better that we can tackle and be able to put together some sort of action plan. I mean, it's one thing to talk about this in like the hypothetical sense and in the top down structure to where we're seeing the issues from a 30,000-foot view. And it's a different thing to get to a point where we can actually put together tangible action steps that we can go out and put into practice. And that's one of the things that Rachel touched on in the documentary, well, in the doc, is that she in a neighborhood in St. Louis, there's blocks where people have gone just block to block, you know, restabilizing, if that's a word,
Mm-hmm.
these neighborhoods and taking them back over just 100 feet at a time.
Hmm.
And it's little steps, but if you go a little bit of a distance consistently, eventually you're going to have a whole city. And then eventually you'll have a whole state, and then eventually you'll have the entire country. So, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So, and I think,
True.
conversations are a good catalyst for that action. Because if people don't know what to do, we're going to be in a state where we just aren't doing anything at all. So
Yeah.
there is a time for action, but I think conversations and dialogue are also a key part of this process. And I think the more of those we have, the quicker we can start to tackle these issues.
Yeah, and that actually leads to my next question, because you're right. I mean, we do need to be having these conversations, and that's why I'm glad that you did this documentary. That's why I loved being on that Twitter Spaces that Teslin had, and just in general, even this conversation, because they do spark action. I'm going to ask you a two-part question. What needs to happen? What do people need to be doing in these areas that does not involve the government to deal with a lot of this violence and poverty and destruction?
That's a good question, man. And I think that is what hinders a lot of people, especially on the conservative side of the aisle, from that conversation. Because you got people screaming about reparations all day, so they think that's going to be the starting
Yeah.
point for everything that has to do with a black issue, which it isn't. You know, I don't know a lot of people who are pushing for state-backed solutions, but I think it's a good question in terms of what non-governmental way forward is there, and that's going to involve a couple things. I mean, a large part of it is economics.
Mhm.
We have to start valuing economics and valuing each other enough to want to build each other up financially and educate each other enough to be like, hey, you need to save money.
Mhm.
This is how mortgages work. This is how bank accounts work. Like it just the exchange of
Mhm.
knowledge. One of the things that I did with Maj, I went out to the Solutionary Center in Philadelphia and did a mortgage boot camp seminar, to where we're just educating the people there in the neighborhood about the basics of homeownership, because nobody talks to you about that. You go through your whole life having gone through elementary school and post-secondary education, college, advanced degrees. Nobody ever talks about nobody shows you a mortgage statement. Nobody shows you the end of the year, tax receipt, and how to go over all that information and explain how it works and explain how you're getting the best pricing. So I think taking more of a role, those who have the knowledge to educate people financially and help build the economics of a neighborhood. Because once you're stabilized economically, then you won't have to resort to things like crime and selling drugs and robbery. You'll be
Mhm.
able to make your money by legal means and handle business the right way. So if we remove that hurdle, then that solves that problem. Another thing we could do is encourage each other to pursue, to have higher. I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this. We have to start valuing academics and academic success. There's no easy way to put it. We just do. We have to start making it cool, like Zuby was saying in the film, and valuing the idea that it's not corny to be smart.
Right.
It's going to put you in a much better place to accomplish what you want to accomplish and make the money that you want to make, if you're intelligent, if you can read, if you're a regular reader, not that you can read, that you're constantly in a state of evolution
Mhm.
and looking to propel yourself forward through the act of gaining more knowledge. And that's tough to do. I mean, it's tough to do in a culture that values talking more than listening and
Right.
creating content more than consuming content. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's we're set up to want to post TikTok videos and Instagram reels, and now YouTube's doing shorts. So not only just content, but even shorter content that's less nuanced, that's less likely to provide real solutions just for clicks.
Mhm.
That's the society we have, and that's a hurdle that we all have to face. And it's not just that's not a black thing, that's an American thing.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Um, but that's got to be a part of the conversation too. I think there are a lot of things that we can do that don't involve the state. I mean, I think there are some things that may have to include government. School choice
That's my next question.
initiative. We can't do that without the government,
Yeah.
right? You need to, but it's a state thing. It's a local issue, not a
Yeah.
federal issue, right? So we have school districts around the country, and we have state legislatures, fortunately, around the country, who are championing the idea of school choice and passing legislation, like here in Arizona, that opens up ESA programs, education savings accounts programs, that gives people the opportunity to pull their kids out of a failing school system and put them into a system where they can actually succeed and thrive. And that's just one of a number of very tangible steps and things that we can do to sort of unravel this mess and back out of it. And I do want to reference this as well, because it's in the special. You talked about it, and Rachel talked about it. We're not talking about an issue that's plaguing the majority of black people. It's a handful. It's a very small
Yeah.
percentage communities that actually have this issue. I wrote a piece a couple weeks ago on a report that came out showing that 73% of all homicides are committed in just 5% of the counties in the United
Yeah.
States. So
Yeah,
it's
that was a
very,
trip when I found that
it's
out.
very localized. That's almost all of it is in a very small proportion of the areas. I mean, you could guess which cities. I don't even have to tell you. But that comes down to local decisions, local policy making. So at some point, some state solutions will have to be involved because private citizens can't legislate.
Right. Exactly. Awesome. So last question. So you've done this documentary. What's next? Are you going to do another one, or how do you plan on expanding this conversation?
Brother, I have no idea, man. I am making this up as I go. I have
You're
not
building the plane while you're flying it.
I've not thought that far ahead, man. At this point, I'm just doing what I need to do for Timcast and kind of just weighing options. And I don't have any immediate plans to do another long film, another long project. I'm not sure what's next, but I do know that it's a conversation starter.
Yeah.
And one thing that I am starting to do, and I want to continue to do, is to have conversations with individuals who are in the space of making change happen, and start to figure out what an actual blueprint looks like, right? What are the action steps? What do we need to do? How would Scott Pressler handle this conversation? He's a guy who is boots on the ground all day.
Yeah.
Right? He gets out and does the work. So what does that look like? How do we get from talking about these things in a conceptual sense to being able to point to a report that shows there's been a measurable difference in the change that we're looking to make? And I think, if we continue to have conversations with people like Teslin, with people like Sonnie, really all stakeholders, anybody who's actually interested in making this change manifest, there's some way forward in order for us to be able to collaborate and work to make that happen. Because I don't think this has to be an issue that is a talking point for one side or the other when it comes election time. Sure. I don't think this has to be an issue that materializes just when people want to enact gun control measures. I think there's a way, and I honestly believe, maybe I'm crazy for it, but I believe enough people actually want to actually care about this issue to want to pursue some sort of change. And then where we're sort of dropping the ball is on what that looks like and what it's going to take to actually get us there. So hopefully, my goal is to be a part of that conversation and just have some sort of role in being able to facilitate that type of change.
Good. And I hope that you do more with it. I know you will, but sometimes you do have to build the plane while you're flying it. So I know you're going to come up with something, but I think that what you just touched on there is important. A lot of people care, but they just don't know what to do. They know maybe to give money, but who do you give money to? We saw how that went with the Black Lives Matter Global Foundation, not the local chapters, the Global Foundation. And we saw how that went. It was a grip, right? So I think that I like where you're going with this, because I see that it's going to get to an area where it can actually show people, okay, this is what you can do tangibly, physically, to help solve the problem. And I think that's going to go a long way. So I really hope that more people see this documentary and see more of these conversations on it, because I think it's great. Like I said, I've never really seen a documentary like this before that had such an honest conversation about the subject.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. And there's a lot of conversations to be had. And if this can start those, then I'm more than happy to be a part of it. So
okay, great. Well, before we sign off, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, man, if you want to find me or yell at me, you can reach me on Twitter at Adrian Norman DC. That's actually my handle on most platforms. Instagram, Adrian Norman DC. YouTube, I think, is just Adrian Norman. Truth Social is just Adrian Norman. And then I have links there to my writings over at Timcast as well. And then if you look up Project 21, it's a black networking group. And the organization is it's a part of the National Center for Public Policy. And we've laid out a number of steps, not just on solving violence, but a number of steps to improve Black communities throughout the United States. And there's very tangible things there as well. So.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining, and we'll have you on again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, bro. Appreciate it.
You got it.